Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our series of family history online webinar classes from the Sandy Granite Family History Center. This is the first class in our next series for this winter series. And tonight we have a great presenter and a really good friend, James Tanner. And I think if there's anything that goes along with genealogy, I think James has done it. He's extremely active. He's been a teacher and presenter for Roots Tech over the years, for BYU and the Family History Center and library there at BYU, the BYU Family History Webinars series, and all kinds of other teaching to other groups literally all around the world, and has done training and shows and everything for groups like MyHeritage and whatnot. So it's a privilege for us to have James here tonight and to have all of you with us as well. A couple of things of note before James gets started, and you can see his title for tonight's presentation there on your screen. If you have questions for James, why don't you hold those until the end, or when they come up in your mind, you can, if you think you'll forget, put them on the chat, and we'll go over those also at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, we're going to turn, and I mentioned one other thing. This presentation is being recorded, and it will be available generally by the first of next week on the Granite Family History Center website, which is www.granite.fhc.com. And it'll be available there on the resources tab for the Family History Center's website. So thank you for being with us tonight, and we'll now turn the time to James Tanner.
Howdy, glad to be here. One of the things that I think we'll start out, I'd like to start out kind of explaining is that when we do these presentations, webinars online, we recycle some of them because the changes that happen over shorter periods of time than you would believe are somewhat overwhelming. And I would mention that every one of the websites that are presently featured in what I'm going to talk about tonight have undergone major changes in the last year, either of some way or another. And it's just incredible how much difference there is as I go back sometimes and kind of reuse a topic that I've had in the past. And I think, well, I can just reuse that. And then I go through it and find out I have to rewrite the whole thing. And I think that's part of the whole process here. So we're going to get right into this. And first of all, we need to define a few things. And one of them is, what is FamilySearch? A lot of us use it, and we're all kind of refer to it, but we need to know what it is. FamilySearch is the name used by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to describe its family history efforts, products, and services. FamilySearch.org is the name of the primary website where you can discover, preserve, and share your family history. Okay, this is the official definition by FamilySearch from their website. I'm going to add a few more things. Back in 1894, the church at that time organized an organization, genealogical organization, for many reasons. And one of them was public relations reasons. Because of the atmosphere back then, there was severe persecution of the church at the time. And so in order to, let's say, break into the greater genealogical community, they decided to use a different name. So they formed what was called the Genealogical Society of Utah. And the Genealogical Society of Utah is still with us, by the way. And it's DBA, the name they're using is now called FamilySearch. And so FamilySearch basically is the continuation of the Genealogical Society of Utah and its relationship with the church. There is an organization, a corporation, which is separate from the church called FamilySearch International. And that is the official doing business part of the FamilySearch organization. So you pretty much got that. And Mike mentioned that the FamilySearch.org and FamilySearch are both wholly owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So there's no outside interests or outside people from in either of those organizations. And it's kind of important to understand that, because a lot of people have a difficulty differentiating between FamilySearch and all of the partner websites. If you're not overly familiar with what's on FamilySearch or what FamilySearch does, you may get it confused with some of the other big websites out there like Ancestry or Find My Past or MyHeritage. And so this is in part in talking about the partners with FamilySearch is a hope to differentiate each of those different entities so that they become the different resources that can be used, and they each have their pluses and perhaps some minuses, and things that are that everybody likes about them and things that people don't particularly care. And all of those kinds of things work together, but in each case, it's like a good example would be if you were going to decided you were going to wear the same clothes every day for the rest of the year. You could do that, I suppose. And it would probably be, I'm sure there are people in the world who are in the poverty that isn't an option. But for many of us, we wouldn't want to do that every single day because, and why? I mean, why not? Why not just wear the same thing every day and then you wouldn't have to think about it? Well, that's kind of the attitude that we have when we get into talking about a multitude of websites. There's also the technology problem that people are basically get used to one way of getting on a computer and one way of looking at their email and going through their process. And then when they get into family history, they find out that it's not that easy. And then they focus on one program, and I'll hear things like, I'll ask and I'll say, well, have you ever worked with Ancestry? And they say, well, I looked at it, but I really haven't done anything with it. And what you're communicating to me is that you're basically staying in the same spot simply out of a habit or because you're being forced to by your background or culture or whatever, and that you're not taking advantage of other options. Now, one thing that's very important here with the FamilySearch partner websites is that for those people who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, these partner websites, because of the agreements that have been made with FamilySearch with each of these organizations, each of these entities, are free. The access to them, once there is an established account with them through FamilySearch, by initiating it through FamilySearch, then each of these particular websites are free. And we'll get into that, what that actually means and what kind of limitations there may be on that. It's also understandable that some of these websites have free versions, but they're all basically subscription websites at some level. So no matter how much of their website appears to be free, at some point they are charging for what they have to do and what they provide to the public. one thing that is also important to understand from this perspective is that FamilySearch is free, period. It's free to everyone, and there are some limitations, but the limitations involve access to certain types of information that are available on FamilySearch to members of the church, which are not available to others. And that, of course, are primarily revolve around the ordinances that take place in the church's temples. So this is kind of the overview of how these they fit in. It sometimes, this is probably one of the things that I face that I feel more frustrated with, is that people really don't understand how this process works. And an analogy that I sometimes give is, let's say, for instance, you are sitting at home one day and sort of, doing whatever you do, and you get a call on the phone, and it says that, and they're from this big company, and they say to you, well, look, we've decided to give you a brand new Mercedes-Benz free. And you say, well, that'd be nice. And they say, well, we're going to have it delivered to you tomorrow. And you say, well, what's the catch here? Why are you giving me this? Oh, we just decided that it would be in your best interest if you had a Mercedes. And they said, well, how did this come about? Well, you are part of this program that we have, and we want you to participate. Well, anyway, you go through this conversation, and then they deliver the car, and you say, well, look, I already have a good car, and I like my new car. I like my car, and I'm not ever going to touch that Mercedes. Why? You can put it in the garage. And so they put it in the garage, and it sits there. When you do that, you are basically doing what I see what happens here with the partner programs. You've been given this tremendously valuable resource in each of these programs that are listed, and as a result, they're free, but you're just letting them sit in the garage because you don't have time to get to know what they are. You don't want to use them. You're used to your old program, whatever it is, and you're not going to use the other programs. So what I hope to do in this presentation is to help you, give you some idea of why these programs are important and why you would want to take and make the effort, even if it's a learning curve, to get into and begin using these programs. I think the one thing that we can mention at this point that's important is that the Family History Guide has instructions, detailed step-by-step instructions for each of the ancestry, if I might pass my heritage and FamilySearch. And so we already have another free program called the Family History Guide, the FHguide.com, THEFHGUIDE.com. That is is the one that's going to help us get into all these programs if we're starting out at zero. Okay, so let's move along here and get this going. Basically, how this all works is FamilySearch provides this because it gives us access to many times the number of historical records on FamilySearch. There are about presently something over 4 billion records on FamilySearch, but each of these websites adds millions or billions of more records to what people can research. And these are all free of charge to Latter-day Saint people. So also begin to understand that for other people who are not members of the church, some of these websites are available free in family history centers, but they have some limitations. Mainly, the most limitation is that you're not able to put your family tree onto the library editions of these programs. Each of the websites has a different criteria for free access, and not all the features may be available. So when you go into the program, there may be some parts of the program that are available and others that are not. And in addition to that, some of these companies have more than one website. Ancestry, for example, has a program called Fold3. It also has another program called newspapers.com. These two programs, those other websites, are not included in the partner program. So they're still subscription programs. They're both very valuable programs, but then you'd need to evaluate from your standpoint whether you want to pay the money to get subscriptions. I know many people who pay subscriptions for newspapers.com because it's such a valuable resource. MyHeritage, for example, owns other programs that are not included necessarily directly into the subscription you get with MyHeritage. You have to subscribe separately to the programs that they own. And we'll talk about one or two of those as we go along. So this is, and Find My Past has the same thing. They have British newspapers, and they have some other websites that are genealogically oriented that are not part of the subscription. So this is just part of the story. It does give us a tremendous amount of resources that are available, but does not by any means answer all the resources that are out there on the internet today, or and that's still sitting in paper in different archives. And these other websites, as I mentioned, are not included in the partnership agreement. So we don't get access. You may get an ad when you go on one of these websites for the other program. One most common ones is on Ancestry, where you look and see a newspaper article that you'd think would be really interesting about your ancestors, and you click on it and it says it's only available through newspapers.com. So there's some limitations. But I need to repeat that these are all valuable genealogical resources for all researchers. Everyone who gets into the process of doing genealogy, family history, researching ancestors will benefit from using all of these programs. Some of them are more focused on a particular area, as Philae and GennyNet. We'll show those in just a while. Both of those are French programs. And so the records sets that they have are predominantly French, but they have other records too. And some of the others will talk about their focus and how they work together. One way to check whether or not what you're looking for is even on any of these websites, including FamilySearch, is to use the website catalog. On FamilySearch, it's the catalog. On Ancestry, it's called the card catalog. On MyHeritage, it's called the all collections, the collections. And on Find My Past, it's view all collections. So there's a way to look on the websites to see what their current listings of records are. And many of them allow you to look directly at the website through a geographical area. For example, how many records do you have for Ireland? Or how many records would you have for Germany? Or what's the record sets you have for Denmark or Norway or Sweden or whatever? And you can then look in the catalog for each of these to see whether or not the records you're looking for even exist. One of the examples I give is that if I go to FamilySearch.org, if I go to Ancestry, for example, first, I'll go to Ancestry and look for something like marriage records in the county where I grew up, part of my life grew up in Apache County, Arizona. I'll find that Ancestry does not list in their catalog as having any records from Apache County, Arizona. They may have other marriage records, but they don't have any specific records. But if I go on to FamilySearch, I find a huge long list of records from Apache County, Arizona. It's just a difference in the emphasis and the availability of those records. But if I did the same search on FamilySearch for some records that were unique on Ancestry, I'd get the same thing. I'd get lots of records on Ancestry and relatively fewer records on FamilySearch. So that's kind of one of the ways to look at it. Now, each of these emphasize that each of these websites has unique records that are not available on any other website. And I have to say that many times over the time that I'm involved with people teaching at the BYU Family History Library or elsewhere around. I often get questions like, well, don't they all have the same records? And my answer is no, they don't all have the same records. They have some of the same records because some of the records are kind of universally used. The most common one is all of these websites, at least the larger websites, the MyHeritage, Ancestry, and Find My Past, and FamilySearch all have full sets of the United States Census records from 1790 to 1940. None of the other, some of the, there are probably a half a dozen to a dozen other websites that have the US Census records. And so some of those records are kind of generally available everywhere. So why would we go there? Well, we got to understand that we go beyond that to unique records, records that you're not going to find any other place. So let's take a short look at each of those 6 partner websites as they are today. First of all, we'll start out with Ancestry, and we'll have a look about what is Ancestry? Ancestry is a corporation. It was at one point a public corporation. It is now privately owned by an investment group. And it is a very large website. It is one of the oldest online websites with a continuous history, and it claims to be the largest and have the most records. That can't be determined by looking at any of the websites. It's after looking many times, they all define what they have and what they call a record and what they say they have differently. And so it's really kind of a meaningless question, but they are very large websites. They have literally billions of names of people in billions of records. And so it's they're extremely more than we can comprehend as a matter of what is available out there on these websites. Basically, there's certain components to Ancestry, and now we're going to go kind of through some the statistics here to give you an idea. They have about 3 million paying subscribers and about 30 plus international markets. In other words, records from about 30 different countries out there. And then about 18 plus million DNA tests. Ancestry has gotten very heavily into the DNA and health industries and is very much involved in promoting their DNA program. And it's a very interesting way to establish connections. One cautionary thing about taking DNA tests from any of these organizations is that you may find out information that you probably would rather have not have known. And so it's kind of important to understand a little bit about a DNA and what to expect from having a DNA test before you go ahead and take that information and put it up on one of these websites. And all of the 3 big ones that I've mentioned, Ancestry and FamilySearch, Ancestry and MyHeritage and Find My Past, all have their own DNA programs that are associated with their website. And for some people understanding that the advantage of that have taken DNA tests with all of these websites in order to have a maximum amount of exposure on into the numbers of people out there registering. This is kind of an insight here. Why would you do that? Why would you go out and get all the different DNA tests on these different websites? Well, the other part of it is that you need to put your family tree on these websites. When you do that, then each of these websites will help you find people who share your DNA. And so basically, for people who have really difficult times going back even 2 or 3 or 4 generations in their family history, for whatever reason, a DNA test may be the way that opens up a vast amount of information. They have currently listed 33,109 record collections, and that number changes a little bit over time as they acquire more records. So there's just a huge website that has some very good reasons. There are about 27 billion records. This is according to their most recent, one of their most recent representations. And that's, of course, an approximate number. And we don't really know how they define a record. So we don't know how that number applies to how many historical records or how many people are on the records or whatever. One of the most important things about Ancestry and the other websites, all of the other websites, is that they offer an opportunity for you to build a family tree. And then in addition to that, they give you record hints, which means that each of these websites search through all of their records and they match up the information in the records to your individual in your family. Now, this may be correct, it may not be correct, and they each vary in their degree of accuracy, but the records are fabulously useful. And for extending your family line and working with the records, you can see here, this is kind of a screenshot from one of my parts of my family tree, and you can see there are records available. Those little green leaves are the marks that show there are records available for almost everybody here on this part of my family tree. The number of these record hints, which I have now cumulatively have in just these in FamilySearch and the other 3 major websites, probably exceeds right now close to 100,000, which is not a number I'm ever going to be able to process. But as we go ahead and as I work through my doing research, I find them to be extraordinarily helpful. You don't get them unless you have a family tree on the program and are registered. And even if you do get them, if you don't look at them and if you don't evaluate them and apply the information to the individuals in your family tree, they're just kind of an interesting little decoration, but the real purpose is to help you find the information that you're looking for by having it aided by the computer searches rather than you spending all the time to go through the records. So what's Ancestry best for? What would you, if you were doing research in some countries, why would you want to get into Ancestry? Of course, the British Isles is a big place. That's where I think that Ancestry has some of the most complete and most valuable records, along with Find My Past, for the British Isles. And if you have English ancestors and you're not looking in and not researching your family and ancestry, you're probably ignoring that Mercedes in your garage that's going to help you or whatever. Maybe that's a bad analogy because maybe some of us don't need a second car and don't even want it. But in this case of finding records, the more we have, the better off we are, and the better and the easier it is for us to make some headway in our families. Of course, they have a tremendously large collection of records from the United States, very detailed. They also have records from Australia and New Zealand down there, and from South Africa, and quite a few records from the Scandinavian countries. Most of the records they have are from Sweden. Quite a few years ago, they made a agreement with ArcDigital, the Swedish archives, and they have a significant number of Swedish records, and they're all searchable, and they do get record hints, so it's very valuable. And there's a fairly good representative collection from other places in Europe. Not as extensive as some of the other programs because they're more focused, but they're still very good collection. But you always need to check the other programs to see whether or not the record you're looking for is on that, or the types of records you're looking for are on those other websites. And you can take advantage of their DNA testing. This is kind of a screenshot of some of my relationships. It turns out that they unsurprisingly found out that I came from the United States and from the British Isles, Denmark, and they threw in Sweden and Iceland. That's interesting because I've never traced any ancestors back either, to Norway or to Iceland, not Sweden. And so there I am, wondering why I have relatives, except for the fact that Norway and Denmark for many years was the same country. So there may very well be people who are interrelated. And Iceland peoples come from the same ancestry. And so that's not totally surprising. One of the things they have that's sort of an innovation with Ancestry is called Through Lines, and Through Lines tells you which of these people, the people in your family tree, are represented by the people that have DNA matches. So you can see that in each of these people who are my direct line ancestors, I can go to Ancestry and find out people who are now living today who are my relatives who may also be descendants of these people. And that is one way of finding information about ancestors that we have very great difficulty in finding. The one particular ancestor that this solved was a DNA test that helped us to find the origin, the parents of my great-great-grandfather, who was he's my great-grandfather, who was the supposed to be an orphan. And he was an orphan, and it turned out he was an orphan, and we were able to find his parentage, his bloodline parentage, through a DNA test and confirm some research we had done in the records and that my daughter found. So why would you use Ancestry.com? So that's come down to the records. If you're doing research in the United States in the last 200 years or so, back into the 1800s, both FamilySearch and Ancestry are complementary programs. They both have records, and some of them are the same records because FamilySearch has shared those records with Ancestry. But often, as you work with this Ancestry program, you'll find out that the search engine finds records that FamilySearch does not find, and that FamilySearch finds records that Ancestry can't seem to find. And then when you get both going, they find more records together when you're working with both programs together than you would find if you were just working in any one of those programs. So this is kind of the key here, that Ancestry directly complements. Now, there's another use for Ancestry that's very helpful, and that is for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who have an LDS account with Ancestry. They can actually exchange information between the two programs. So a person who is a member of the church can have their family tree on FamilySearch and then go and put their same family tree on Ancestry. And then any record hints or information that's developed in the Ancestry family tree, by clicking on the little icon, there's a tree icon in each of those when you're registered with an LDS account, you can then go through a process of exchanging information. Now that takes a whole nother hour or two to explain in detail of how that all works, but just be aware of the fact that exchanging information back and forth between the two programs is facilitated, and that you can go ahead and get that information over into the family tree rather easily by doing that connection. So this is kind of the advantage here of Ancestry. Now we're going to move on to Find My Past. And Find My Past is a British-owned company. It's owned by a Scottish publishing company, and it is really the largest website in Great Britain that there is for genealogy. Period. There are some government websites like Scotland's People and others, but this is the huge multi-million billion dollar record website. So what is it? Well, they have birth, marriage, and death records from England. They have census, land, and land substitute records, all of these going back into the early 1600s, 1500s, and directories and social histories, immigration and travel records, and military service and conflict records, and newspapers and periodicals. Now, the newspapers I mentioned are primarily in another website. That's the British newspapers website. But Find My Past is the premier program for doing English research, and Irish and Scottish and Welsh and everything out, Northern Ireland, everything with having to do with the British Isles. Oh, and parish registers going back into the 1500s. And you can look at what's called the A to Z of record sets. If you go to the search tab, there'll be a link to the A to Z of record sets. And there's a list of all the different records. And some of the records on this website that may be unusual is that they have millions of records from, not millions, hundreds of thousands of records from India for the British occupation. If you think of the British Empire and you think of all those countries that were originally part of the empire, including the United States, the colonies, the British colonies, then you understand what records they have on this website. So it's British Empire records. And I have to point this out. A lot of times people say, well, most of my ancestors I'm looking for in the United States, in New England. And I say, well, why would you not think that the British company who had the British records would not have your New England records too, of the families? And they go, oh, yeah, makes sense, doesn't it? Well, that's exactly what we have here. You can also build your family tree, and they do have record hints. And it's interesting because I'll do some research on the program and then I'll go, oh, I should have go look at this person at record hints. And I'll find that records that I just spent half an hour looking for are already on the website as record hints for the people I'm looking for. So it's helpful to use all of the resources of these programs. But what is it best for? What is Find My Past best for? Obviously, the British Isles, including Ireland. Remember, Irish records. Ireland was part of England, of the British Empire, was part of Britain for hundreds of years. And so many of the records that you think it would be Irish records are really British records. And so they may or may not be on Find My Past. It may be another Irish, and Irish records are always a challenge, but there is a substantial number of records there. Canada obviously was part of the British Empire and part of the Commonwealth, and so those records are on Find My Past. The United States, not only because the United States had the original colonies, British colonies, but it's because they've done a lot of other records. For example, Find My Past has not been able for, at any time in the past, FamilySearch has not been able to, any time in the past, been able to obtain copies of Catholic records on the eastern coast of the United States. So Catholic records from New York and Massachusetts and Philadelphia and Pennsylvania and all the other states on the East Coast, the Catholic dioceses that have just kind of categorically refused to give the records to FamilySearch because of the connection with the church. And so now Find My Past is in the process of digitizing all the diocese records and parish records, and down to the parish level on some levels for the eastern coast of the Catholic records. And they're now beginning to be online in the millions and available to be searched. So if your family goes back to Catholics on the East Coast, you probably should start looking at Find My Past. Of course, the rest of the British Empire in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and India, and the other places that are scattered around the world. And be sure to check with the other websites, because if you don't find it on Find My Past, you may find it on one of the other websites. And you can take advantage of their DNA testing. They're more focused on England and particularly, and the British Isles. And so if you took a DNA test from Ancestry, for example, you may not get the number of people that you get by taking a DNA test specifically to find your English ancestry. Why would you use Find My Past? I think I've explained that a little bit already, and that is that Find My Past is kind of the premier place for doing British research, British Isles and England. So if you have ancestors in the British Isles and England, if you're not using Find My Past, then you're simply ignoring a lot of records that you'll find that you won't find anyplace else, and you won't find them as easily as you will on Find My Past. So they're just, it's got a really good search engine. It's got great resources, and it's just a very, very interesting. Some of my friends, one friend whose parents and grandparents lived in India with the British rule, does most of the research on Find My Past, because that's where all the records are. Now we're to MyHeritage, myheritage.com, 16.3 billion historical records. By the way, that number has gone up at least 3 billion in since I last reviewed that number. I always check a day or two before I do a presentation to see what the latest number is, because MyHeritage is in the acquisition mode and is acquiring millions and even up to billions of records at a time. And simply, in a sense, if you want to get real about it, is purchasing the records and the rights to the records. So they are just and most of these records are in Europe. And this is the focus of MyHeritage Europe. They have more than 96 million users. If you're thinking of a DNA test and your family came from Europe, and especially Eastern Europe or parts of the country where maybe there aren't so many records available online or easily available, taking a DNA test from MyHeritage may open up a whole world of new relatives to you. And I can spend the whole hour telling you stories about people whose lives have been changed because they took a DNA test with MyHeritage and found relatives they didn't even know existed. I have one friend who lives in California who began a search for his Russian and Ukrainian ancestors by getting a DNA test at MyHeritage and starting a family tree. And the last time I checked, he had like 400 something relatives in his family tree and over 2,000 DNA matches. And he's just thrilled. He's gotten photographs, he's gotten all sorts of information about his ancestries through that DNA test. There are billions of profiles. I don't even get a number out of it. There are just billions and billions. Profiles are each individual person in a family tree. 83 million family trees and millions of profiles added daily. And so you can build your family tree on MyHeritage. I would strongly suggest that you do this. If you have, with record matches on MyHeritage, which are these brown items, and the green dots are for people matches, matching you to relatives who may have share parts of your family tree. The brown ones are for records. And I have literally sat down with somebody from scratch and been able to build a 4-generation pedigree from them as an individual in about 45 minutes with MyHeritage. And in addition, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, with their free account, can actually synchronize up to 8 generations of their FamilySearch family tree portion over into MyHeritage so that they can find all the people for them. That's why I have so many record matches, is because I have more people here with information than I can possibly process. And smart matches, which I mentioned, are the people. And that's where where, for instance, my friend in California, he's been able to, through smart matches and shared trees, has been able to find some of his living cousins and found a whole family represented up in Canada that is holding family reunions that he's directly related to. So he's extremely happy about all of this. Those are the people matches. So you can explore the tools, you can colorize. By the way, their technology is phenomenal. You can upload photos to black and white photos to MyHeritage and have them colorize the photos. You can see here how that process works. And it takes just a few seconds, and you can have all your old black and white photos colorized. You can enhance your photos, take a photo that appears to be kind of blurry and turn it into a much more detailed photo. And you can use the tree consistency checker. It will check a very large number of different inconsistencies or errors in your family tree, like being born after the death of the father and things like that. And those things need to be corrected, and it gets pretty, once again, this can be another part that can be a little overwhelming because of the numbers you may find. There's an extensive pedigree mapping program included that will show you exactly down to the place of every single place in your family tree, and show you all the people who live in that area on your family tree, which creates what we call clusters, and is used in a part of genealogical research called cluster research. Have to keep moving along here, folks. So it's best for these countries, the Norwegian company, the Scandinavian countries, MyHeritage has purchased all the records, access to all the records in Denmark from the 1600s, and is in the process of adding all the records from Sweden and Norway. And they're all indexed and searchable, and very friendly. And they also do translations and everything. So it's a marvelous tool. And then anything having to do with Europe, this is the premier program for Europe, and reputedly has the largest collection of German records of any of the websites. So if your family comes from Germany, this is the place to go, and Eastern Europe and Central Europe. And then all of these areas here, very, very heavily in Europe, and surprisingly not, because this company is headquartered in Tel Aviv, outside of Tel Aviv, Israel. It's an Israeli company. And yes, they do have records. One of the things they did was to digitize every grave marker in the whole entire country of Israel and transcribe every grave marker. They did that as a company project. United States, they have a tremendously large number of very interesting ones. They have all the huge multi-million yearbook collection. They have city directories. If you want to see what your old yearbook pictures look like, you can look here on MyHeritage. There's a lot more than there are on MyHeritage than there are on Ancestry, for example. Australia, just those places, but always check the other websites. Take advantage of the DNA testing. They have a thing called the theory of family relativity. They'll show you an ancestor, and then they'll show you someone who is directly related to that ancestor, to your cousin, and how you are related. And that is a very, very helpful process. So there's the DNA testing. They have a chromosome browser if you're interested in getting into DNA testing seriously. And they create auto clusters showing you DNA matches among different groups of your ancestors, how all of the people in a certain group of grouping are related. Ethnicities, they're helpful, they're fun, they're interesting. They change from thing. Why would you use MyHeritage? The main reason why I would suggest you use MyHeritage is if your ancestors come from Europe, and especially from Eastern Europe and from Scandinavia, you're simply wasting your time by not having at least the connections here. You really get to be helpful. Next one's called American Ancestors, and we're going to go through those rather quickly because these are basically database programs. American Ancestors does have a family tree, but it is a paid family tree, and you can search this one. Why would you use this one? It's the New England Historic Genealogical Society Library, and that's what's going in here into American Ancestors. Build a family tree on American Ancestors, but there is a charge if you go over a certain number of people. And why would you use American Ancestry? Is because they have the largest collection of New England records in existence. And a lot of them are online. Very valuable records such as the Mayflower descendancy records and the Great Migration, the early listings and indexes to all of the people exhaustively a number of people who lived in New England from 1620 to 1630 and then beyond. So anyone, any of your ancestors come from New England, you will be benefited by looking on American ancestors. Philae is a huge French website, and it was recently purchased by MyHeritage. So it now is part of MyHeritage, and subsequently MyHeritage has put millions and millions of records, of French records, into their website and to be that are indexed and ready to be searched on MyHeritage. You can build a family tree, and actually this is the best designed family tree that I am aware of. And I wish that it was copied by more of the people. I really like this design. And so it's very easy to read, and it's very easy to see the relationships. It's not nearly as confusing as the regular pedigree chart. So here's one reason for Philae, and they do have record hints, and they do have millions of French records in all sorts of categories, and you can see all the different categories. And it's best for France, but you can always check the other websites and check around to see if there's anything that happens to be on this website. The answer to this question of why use Philae is if you have French records, this is where you go. There's just this, and GennyNet. GennyNet is the other French company. So these are both French companies. But GennyNet is now owned by Ancestry, because when MyHeritage bought Philae, Ancestry gobbled up GennyNet. So now it's part of Ancestry. They have a lot of members, 7 billion people in family trees and archival records and family pictures and hundreds of millions of indexes. And so this is a huge collection of various records. And surprisingly, they have a lot of records that you would not expect. Like, for example, I'm getting records from them that tell about a lot of information that and sources for my own family tree, which is primarily in the United States, at least at this level, with matches and clues. I have illustrated statistics, which are pretty interesting. It's best, of course, for France, but it's interesting that it has a lot of French Empire records. So it's got French records in Africa, Canadian French records, and United States records, and a few records from Ireland and the British Isles. But always check many others. There are many other records. You can also do DNA testing through these websites. And these have, for example, a special collection of postcards from all over Europe and primarily France. But just kind of interesting things beyond just that. So why would you use GennyNet? The same reason you would use Philae. If your ancestors came from France, this is where you go to do your French research. Okay, don't get overwhelmed. Take a step back, take a deep breath, and kind of make a plan. I would suggest stepping forward step by step and looking at each of the websites and deciding which ones you want to work on. There are, as I mentioned previously, tutorials for each of these for the big websites, MyHeritage, FamilySearch, Ancestry, and Find My Past on the Family History Guide. But in addition to that, there are many webinars on all of these programs and other resources. And the best thing to do is just to get in and start working with the program with their own tutorials and everything that's there, and begin to do the research so you can begin to appreciate the great resources that these are. Okay, well, thanks for watching.
James, thank you. There, Von Cox, if you'll check over on the chat, Von Cox has a couple of questions that you
Okay.
might respond to. They're kind of related. Can you see those?
Okay. When you do your family tree on different websites, how often how often do the different websites give you different records? All the time, constantly. I get a constant stream of new records off of each of the websites when I go focus on the individuals that I'm working on. So for example, if right now I'm working on some people in the United States, and so I'm using both FamilySearch and Ancestry simultaneously, I'm transferring all my information from FamilySearch into Ancestry so I can take advantage of their record matches, and using their record matches and searches on both websites, I basically can keep building pedigree down. These mostly descendancy research, so I'm not going up in my lines, I'm coming down, but I keep adding people constantly. It's, there's just so many records out there. So how accurate are the different sites? Well, okay. If I'm going to give you just a rough, this is my opinion, rough estimate, I would say that MyHeritage has an edge in their accuracy of their own research. If you do research on MyHeritage, you're going to get just about as good a response as you would on anything. But if you let them do it, you'll find more. The same thing goes for Ancestry, but Ancestry is a little more accurate than the other websites with their search engine, but you're still wasting your time. You might as well get your family tree on there and see if they have any records, because if they do, they'll find them and show you them in record hints. So it's a process where you're basically going to be looking at and evaluating record hints. FamilySearch has some problems with getting focused. Once they have some records and once they start finding record matches, they're very accurate. But if you just do a name search on FamilySearch, it's kind of a grab bag. You may or may not hit some good records. It's not as good as, I always go to Ancestry if I'm frustrated with what I can't find on FamilySearch. So that's kind of the way it goes. On Find My Past has a tremendously accurate search engine. If you start putting in your ancestors' names, you're going to have choices that show you you'll get a lot of records sometimes, but if you're more specific in your search as you go along, you'll be able to find and narrow it down, and you almost always find whole families that are related that way. If you build your family tree on one of these other websites, can others view your tree? Yes. You can generally see other trees on all of the other websites. Can they alter it? No, you own your websites on all these other trees. And that's part of the reason why I have an alternate tree on Ancestry, because, and on MyHeritage, because anything I put into FamilySearch, I put it into Ancestry and then, or MyHeritage. And if someone makes a change, adds a child that I don't know about, or takes out some information or erases the sources, like has happened from time to time, then I simply have to click it all back in from Ancestry. So, it's a good backup and it's fast. That only works, by the way, if you're a member of the church. If you're not a member of the church, you're going to have the same advantage, but you're going to have a little bit slower. You'll have to copy the information back in from your Ancestry account. I can't seem to access either Ancestry or institution when I'm at the Family History Center. Yeah, well, I don't know the answer to that because I don't know what you're trying to do from the from sitting in the Family History Center. I'd have to be sitting there next to you and say, what are you doing? And let me see how you're doing it. And then maybe I can figure out why. Ask somebody who has the simplest way to get into this is to get someone that you know in the Family History Center to become your helper, your consultant helper on FamilySearch, so they can see exactly what's happening on your part of the program, and then they can see if there's something that's wrong. You don't, by the way, you don't access Ancestry or Ancestry Institution from inside of FamilySearch. That may be the problem right there. That's not how you do it. You click, if you want to go to Ancestry, you put in ancestry.com and put in your login and password. And if you're looking at for the Ancestry Institution version, there's going to be a link that's separate from FamilySearch. So that's, I don't know. Other than that, I can't say. It's probably something to do with the way you're registered. So, okay.
Thanks, James. Great, great presentation. Lots and lots of information for people. So we appreciate your time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
One quick word for everyone. Again, I put the web address for the Granite Family History Center in the chat, and you'll be able to access this presentation in a couple of days, 24/7. And there we go. Thank you all for attending tonight. And we'll see you next Tuesday for the next presentation. Good night.
See ya.
Thank you, James.